Welcome students to the online NPTEL course Contemporary Architecture and Design. In the previous two classes we discussed about the postmodernist movement's design features and how they was opposite in the visually and philosophically in the contrast of modernist movement. So today we will discuss about the historicism, which is a postmodernist movement where the historic depiction was very important for this for the architects and designer. So it's a architecture movement as well as also there in the furniture design. We have seen few examples from the previous two classes that where modernist movements totally was devoid of the contextual depiction of historic, especially the classical architectures have not taken the inspiration from classical architecture, but postmodernist architects thought that classical architecture's depiction in building should be there, and that's how they are different from the modernist approach. But in the modernist approach, in the early phase, in the first phase, we have seen in the Chicago style, there was a depiction of classical architecture which they have taken inspiration from Greek architecture, and they have divided the building in three different segments to make the building look shorter, because that was the first time the skyscrapers started coming in the Chicago and the different other cities of USA. But that approach of taking classical depiction was abstraction of classical architecture. But in the postmodern, this is not abstraction, this is like pastiche and taking inspiration and making changing it like a facade ornamentation in different way. And this is in the previous style, which is Chicago style, which was also much more minimalist than this, but in some cases we have seen with Chicago styles Art Nouveau was also there. But this Chicago style was a first phase architecture style, and then if we think about the late modern movement which happened in the middle phase when modernism in the peak, which is internationalist movement. Internationalism and monolithic and other style did not take any historic depiction from the classical and the history which has been done before the modernist movement. So in the historicism, we will see in the the architectural features are returning back to the classical architecture. So it sometimes it's a classical architecture, or it can also be Gothic in few cases, and other which was done before the industrial before the industrial evolution from Renaissance to especially the classical architecture. Whereas modernism rejected the classical architecture and traditional decorative forms. So, and also we have seen in the modernism there are very less example where axial symmetry was there. But in classical architecture, when we started discussing modernism, we have seen that asymmetry is the form of modernism. So in the Bauhaus form, internationalist movement, most of the cases like Franz-Worth House, Johnson House, they are all asymmetric. So Johnson House is a cube where there's asymmetrically there's a cylinder displaced, and many of the cases there asymmetry is there. But in monolithic we have definitely there is some symmetry, because the form was emphasized. So that is a different case. But most of the cases in general, if you think about the modernist movement, asymmetry was exaggerated, and there was no strict norm that building has to be symmetrical, and whatever the ornamentation on this side should be on this side. In the historicism, more visually and in form ways, and the volumetrically symmetrical buildings were there. and the external form and ornamentation was was the protagonist of architecture, and the meaning of architecture was there was some meaning. The architecture, the building or the design started conveying some meaning into it, whereas the decontextualized internationalist movement did not have any meaning. It's just a pure design and arts for arts sake is there, and the pure geometry and pure form did not convey the meaning. It's just minimalist approach which was there in the modernist movement. Now, this started with the Alan Greenberg's design, who's an American architect, whose time frame is around 1980s when he started designing. But this is not pure historicism. This is classicism as architectural vocabulary, which he wanted to promote in postmodern era. And so he blended contemporary and classicism. So all this his buildings looks like classical buildings, many residential buildings. We have mansions and other residential buildings we have designed, which looks like which is imbibed from the classical architecture. So there is a slight difference between classicism and historicism. So in classicism, if you look at so all classical elements are he tried to replicate all classical element in the contemporary building, which is and also bilateral symmetry is there. But in historicism, we will see a depiction which mimics. So in this depiction, this does not mimic. So it's like he tried to replicate what is there in the classical architecture, and this looks classical. And but if we show the when we show the historicism, so historicism has a approach of mimicking the classical architecture. So in the previous example, we shown that in the Walt Disney Center, how Michael Graves is making this small dwarfs, which is in the Doric column, which we have shown in the class in the class when we started discussing the postmodernist approach of architecture. So we have shown how 7 dwarfs of Snow White is shown in the on top of the Doric column. So this is not just taking pure historical building into the translating that into your design. So there is a way of pastiche and mimicking the design is there. So that is the difference between classicism and historicism. So historicism will not just take the classical architecture's element and create the design. So there will be another sense of humor will be added into the design. So one of the building is Portland Public Service Building. So this is a 15-story municipal office building at Portland, Oregon, in USA. So this opened in 1982, which is just the starting time of postmodern movement. And the architect is Michael Graves again. So Michael Graves, many of the design of Michael Graves fall under the historicism movement of postmodern design. So postmodern design also, like modernist movement, postmodern design also has smaller movements within that. So historicism is one of that, which talks about the historic depiction of building, which is opposing the internationalist approach. And then again another movement will be international critical regionalism, which will oppose some other features of modernism. So there are many different movements within postmodernism as well. And in historicism, Michael Graves has many of his works are falling within the historicism, and some of the works which we have already discussed in the previous class when we were showing the difference between modernist and postmodernist movement. So this was a competition entry judged by Philip Johnson. Rejection of modernist principle is there in by Philip Johnson. So Philip Johnson's work we have seen, which is absolute modernist and the high modern era, which is the Johnson House, where he was designing a pure glass box with a cylinder. But we will also see Philip Johnson's work, how his work translated throughout the transformed throughout the movement of contemporary movement. So this building, which is Portland Public Service building designed by Michael Graves is the first postmodern, notable postmodern building in Historicism era, because this is in the early stage of 1982. It was the construction work was finished. So this is again a square which looks like modernism, but postmodernism, but from outside the cladding and everything and the decoration was very postmodern. In the modernist movement, we have seen the cladding was avoided and the pure material was there, pure color was there. But if you look at the cladding and different kind of textures and materials are there, and a lot of different lines and a lot of different things are happening just on the facade. From within the building, it's a cuboid, but on the facade treatment, makes the building a very postmodern in nature. The postmodern decorations are wrapped around the modernism. So this is in the early stage of modernism, where of postmodernism, where everything in the building did not evolve as a postmodern building, but it's a modern building and like gift wrap in a postmodern wrapper. So it's a facade treatment is done in a very postmodern way. So if you look at the building, so architectural historian Charles Jenks wrote that the Portland building still is the first major monument of postmodernism, just as the Bauhaus was the of the modernism. So Bauhaus, from Bauhaus movement, there was a quite change in the modernist movement. So Bauhaus and internationalism also has a link, and then from Bauhaus this all asymmetry, minimalism and pure color, pure form was started. So from this building, so he's saying that from this building the concept of postmodernism started, because with its faults it still is the first to show that one can build with art, ornament and symbolism on a grand scale. So there are a lot of symbolism. So here you can see, so those ribbons are added. That's why many historians say that this is a wrapped the modernism into a postmodern gift wrapper. So here also, if we look at this features, so this features looks like the column. So this is the column capital, which is done in an abstract form, and then these are the ionic columns, flute, which were there in the ionic column, and then ionic columns capital is translated into the very modernist and geometric way. So these two depicts the ionic column, and that is taking the load of some element you have designed, and also you can see the different kind of texture, and then some ornamentation, and also this is bilaterally symmetrical from all the side. So also the front facade inspired from the classical architecture. So here you can see this looks like two columns, and also the Greek gods sculpture is also depicts that this is something which is taking inspiration from Greco-Roman architectural style. So this Greek ionic columns are translated into the contemporary design language. And also if you look at, so there's a glass curtain wall behind that, so that's one background, and there's another kind of cladding, the stone cladding. So all these different colors of claddings are there. So ceramic tiles and glass curtain walls facade design. So there's not just one particular type of cladding. So cladding is also postmodern approach, which is hiding the material, pure material, and it's not showing the material construction material, which is the construction material. So also there's not just one kind of cladding. So there are many different kind of cladding which gives a different kind of colors and texture. So that's why this is eclectic and classical ornamentation is done in a new paradigm. And on the other side you can see there's not classic, this is on top of the column, so there should have been the column capital, but instead of column capital there are ribbons. So that's how this is not the classicism which we have shown in the previous work. If you look at this Greenberg's work, so there's no mimicry and the humor sense of there's no humor added to it. So here in the historicism, this humors are added into the design. Now, I was talking about the change of Philip Johnson's work from internationalist movement to the postmodern movement. So, internationalist movement was the high modern movement where Philip Johnson was designing a glass house, and which is pure glass, and the cylinder when he was designing with the taking inspiration from Ludwig Mies van der Rohe in Francois House. Later he designed Seagram Building. So this is 1949, this is 1958, almost 10 years, a decade later. Again, and he collaborated with Mies van der Rohe, and he have designed the Seagram Building, which comes in the monolithic style, which is a continuation, you can say a continuation of internationalist movement. So this is also internationalist and actually the monolithic. So this is a glass curtain wall and a box. So this is a cuboid. So in monolithic we discuss based on the form, different stages are there, different styles are there, which is cylindrical, circular, grape bunch, metastasis, and cuboid. So this is a box or the cuboid style. So this is Seagram Building, his design after 10 years. And then in 1984 when the postmodernism started, so he is designing AT&T Building, which is also known as Sony Tower in USA, which is he have designed this with John Burgee in 1984. So here if you look at, so it also has a look like a Greek trabeated form with the pediment, and then this is how this is divided, and the color of this building is it's again cladded with a pink stone, pink granite stone, and all these lines gives a sensation of these columns which is going up and holding this capital, and this Greek style is there. So this is absolutely a postmodern building, and falls under the historicism. So there is a transition of his work from the his work is also there in modernist movement, and his work is also there in the postmodernist movement. And if we look at the building's interior, so there is a historic depiction is also there in the interior. So there's Roman semicircular arches are there, and if you look at the flooring, and there's a lot of different textures are there with white and black patterns, and all these chandeliers and illuminations are done in the way it has a clear depiction of history. And also this is a bilateral symmetry, and this is an arcuated door, and then columns are there and pure circles. So a lot of different design elements are there. And then when we enter, so this is the grand enter with a bilateral symmetrical facade is there, which is also depiction of historicism. And in the building we can see a lot of different ornamentations are clubbed together. So this is this is opposing to his what he started with. So this is the Johnson house, and he with the time he changed the design language of his work. Now this is Hamana Building, again designed by Michael Graves. So this is headquarter of Hamana Corporation. So the opening year is 1985. So in the early stage of postmodernist movement. So this is situated at the downtown of Kentucky, USA, and the locally called this is a milk carton building. So if you look at the USA's milk carton, which is something like this. And so these are the milk cartons of Europe and USA, and these kind of milk cartons are there with paper bags, and this building has this kind of shape. So that's why locally it is called milk carton building. Now within the building there is a lot of historic depiction which we will discuss. So each side of the building is designed differently up to the stepping pyramid style upper floors. So this is the upper floor, which gives a feeling of a ziggurat or the stepped pyramid of Egypt. And so that is one historic depiction. Then pink granite cladded exterior facade is inspired from eclectic depiction of different historic monuments. So if you look at the cladding, so this is majorly this is pink granite cladded, but there's a different brown granite is also there, and then there's a use of glass curtain wall and glass windows, and then another different color is there, and yellowish cladding is used. And within the building also, if you look at one particular foyer, the entrance foyer of the Hamana Building, so there's different colored stone are used. So there's black, there's different 3 different color in this, and then fountains, and so there's a lot of design, a lot of design elements are there in a small space. And if you look at, so many design elements are added into the one particular interior space of this building. Now you can see there's a depiction of Parthenon and pyramid, both are there in the particular design. So this is not taking a reference from one particular historic style, which is Greek style. This is also taking inspiration from Egyptian pyramids and everything. And then the way he have changed the pyramids and the Parthenon's volume, this is also quite different, and also has a way to a sense of mimicry into it. So here, if we look at the Parthenon, is a glass Parthenon, and which is made out of steel and glass, which is hanging on top of this with a steel truss. So this shows the contemporary steel truss is holding a classical architecture on top of it, which is like a crown, which is like a jewel on the crown of this building, on the head of this building. And this is like a crystal Parthenon, and the shape of this Parthenon is highly distorted. Now there's another Parthenon's depiction, which is cladded by different colored granite stone, and each and every facade is different in treated in a different way. The facade treatments are different, and the facade designs are different. This is another Parthenon which is on the other side. So this Parthenon is on this side. So another Parthenon which is again stone, and then which also is elongated, and which is hanging. So these hanging Parthenons and everywhere in the building also gives the sense of eclectic depiction of Greek architecture. Now if you look at the entrance, on top of the entrance there is a glass pyramid, which is something like Louvre's glass pyramid by IMP, but this is definitely different. And this is again taking the inspiration from the Egyptian architecture. So this is a glass pyramid, and here again this if you look at this semicircular arch, which is a Roman arch on behind this. So this pyramid is on the other side, so this is on the other side. So this is the entrance pyramid. On top of that there's a slant, which again looks like a entablature of some historic building. And on the other side, which is on the back, this kind of another pyramid is there. This is a different pyramid which is on the back. So this is another pyramid, and which is on top of a Roman arch. So there's a eclectic mixture of historic depiction within the building. Now another example of the historicism is Engineering Research Center, University of Cincinnati West Campus, which is again designed by Michael Graves in 1995. So this serves as an entrance point of the campus. So we'll see how through this building the entry of the campus is designed, and there the placemaking and the axis and transforming the space with the human activity and transforming it into a place is also there, which we will show how when we show the how it is planned, what is the axis into that. But the historic depiction here is this has a from outside you can see this is a main 4 main volume. The primary one breaking in the symmetry of the building. So this is through the primary one there is an axis from where people enter this building. So there are other 3 which is smaller. But here then this is topped with the 4 sculptural smokestacks. So these are just added on top of the building, which looks like a smoke a chimney, because this is an engineering research center and he wanted to depict the engineering with the chimney and the manufacturing and all these things he wanted to depict with a chimney. That's why he added 4 chimneys on top of this building. So these are just a visual aesthetic element and added for the aesthetic purpose to this also functions as a skylight, but majorly this is added for an aesthetic purpose and for this huge height, and this tells a story about this building. This is not contextually, it's not just a cuboid. It's talking, it is telling that this is an engineering center and this has some connection with the engineering through this element which is added on top of this building. Now also locally this is called cash register due to the look of the building. So it looks, on top of that there's this metal cladding which looks like a cash register of that era. And so his another design, which is O'Reilly Theatre of Pittsburgh, which is again designed by Michael Graves, also has a similar copper curved roof, which is also he is using here in the Engineering Research Center of Cincinnati, which is also a semicircular roof on top of this base. So this way of using traditional building material, copper cladding, and the color he is selecting is in the drastic contrast of another building, which is also a postmodern building designed by Peter Eisenman. So this building is a deconstructive building, and this building is a in the Historicism era. So this building, if we look at, so this building does not talk about the floor plate. From outside you cannot see the floor plate, how the floor plates are going. So this building looks like it's tilted, but it's not from within. So we'll discuss this, how deconstructive buildings are designed and what is the philosophy of that. But in the historic building, what I'm trying to say is, in the deconstructive era and historic era, historicism, both are contemporary postmodern movement, but historicism gives a more age-old look and traditional look, and so it helps to age gradually. So this has more this is aged building, and this is more newer building, and this has a futuristic approach, and this has connecting to the history. So in the postmodern movement also there's different way of doing the ornamentation within the same campus. Peter Eisenman, the way Peter Eisenman designing a building and Michael Graves are designing a building, they're very different. And one is looking in Peter Eisenman's case, this building tries to look futuristic, and the other case it takes historic depiction. Now there's a depiction of this historic depiction is through the depiction of like Doric columns on top of the building. So there are a lot of Doric column, and the different facades of building are added. So these are the Doric columns depiction, which is changed in a form. So in the classicism, when we look at the Doric columns, they're proper Doric columns, and the position of the Doric columns are acting as a column, and which is holding a pediment in the classicism. But in historicism, these are the freestanding column on top of this main building. So this is not acting as a purpose of the column. The purpose of the Doric column should hold some structure on top of it, but this is not doing it. So this is just a short, and the depiction of the Doric column is not really a Doric column's way of depicting. So there is no column capital. It's like series of column which is squeezed, and short Doric columns are there. Now here, this is the placemaking thing which I was talking about. So here in the main way, so there is a this building could have been just added like a building block, and then one road could have been gone like that. So this in this situation, if you think about an architectural also if you have an urban design background and or understanding of urban design, you will know that this is not creating a space, because this is a building and this is how from here the peoples are moving. But if you create a building which is and the passages through, so there's a lot of activity will be happening, and this will be a entrance porch where people will meet each other, and it will be defined place. So this road is not defined, people are moving from the any length of this road, but here there is a place created. So the road which is crossing the building, so there's the identity of the space where on the road. So this road does not have any identity, so there's no difference between that. But here when you create like this, so this has a difference, and people will meet there. There's a shade, and this becomes this space then translates into a place where people meet and the activity is there. So space plus humans activity is place. That is the urban design concept of place making. So that is created here because of this road is going through this, and that is why this is the entrance of this campus. And in the entrance through the building, there's a lot of activity happens within this building. So in the modernist movement, so we have seen that this people's activity and people's participation was a little less in modernist approach. In the postmodernist approach, placemaking and participatory design, co-design, and translating voice of customer into the design was more into the postmodern approach. Now this is another example by Robert Venturi, Venturi House, who said less is bore. So this is in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which is designed in 1964, which is before postmodern, but still this is a postmodern building. This has a bilateral symmetry and a lot of different elements are there, but this is designed in 1964, which is before definitely before postmodern, but many of the designs, so there is no hard and fast particular line from where the postmodernist thought started emerging. So this is in just almost a decade before postmodernism, so many of the designs started evolving into the line of thought of postmodernist approach. So if you look at the interior space, so this is a chimney which and the skylight which looks like a chimney from outside, and gives the sensation of bilateral symmetry and the central heavy. So in the classical architecture, we have seen the central part is heavy. This is not just a bilateral symmetry is not just one design features. So this has to be, the classical architectures are generally the central heavy design. So the central part of the building will be always heavy in the classical architecture. So if you look at the even in the Gothic architecture, Notre Dame Chapel and all, so central part has to be, the mass has to come from from the periphery, and the central mass has to be dominating. So that is also there, and that is also talks about the classical approach of designing the volume. And if we look at, so there's a lot of design proportions are going into this design. So this is a golden mean rectangle is used in design, and then all these circles and the penetrations of circle, triangle is generating the form. So here form is becoming more important than the is becoming a protagonist, and so form follows function, which is told in the Chicago movement by Sullivan, is not followed. So form is really important, and the deriving the form, to derive the form, a lot of thought has been given, and then also so form and function is going parallelly. And many of the architectural in architecture style in postmodern movement, we will see that postmodernists sometimes say that function follows form. So form is first and then function. So here we can see the form evolution to real become the protagonist of this design. Now if we see the element of this building, so there are a lot of different elements are juxtaposed together and creating the building. So this is the exploded volume of this building, exploded in the horizontally. So a lot of elements are there, and to create a building which is not a very big scale building. So this is why, and Robert Venturi said in 1964, less is bore, and that is the starting phase of the postmodern approach of design. And we remember that in internationalist movement, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe said less is more, and he's designed the minimalist way of designing building like Francois House and Seagram Building with Philip Johnson, and then also he have designed the Barcelona chair, the Barcelona pavilion, and with the minimalist approach. But Robert Venturi in 1964 started saying that less is bore, so more the element the better, and it is more it will grab the attention of users. So there is more attention and attraction value into the design. So when there is a minimalist approach, so attraction and attention value will be less. So then when there are a lot of elements in terms of shape, form, texture and color, so attraction and attention value becomes higher. So this is the example of less is more, and this is an example of less is more. And you can see mostly these buildings are have the similar volume of space, but in this this distance is not much, but this has a, in a very small scale, this gives a look of a classical building. So this is just a one-story building with a skylight, and on top of this is a staircase going on. But in this scale also, this gives a essence of a monumental historic design, and different design elements are added on the facade. So this facade is extruded, and there's different treatment of the facade which does not have any functional value, just for aesthetic value these are added. So these are the elements which will in modernist movement will never do, because this is just a pure glass box, and the way the structure is there, that is shown in a grid pattern which is in equal distance. But here a lot of elements are, you can see how many what is the element which is going inside the building. But within the, when we discuss the internationalist design, which is derived from less is more concept, so this is just a glass box, and free flowing spaces are there, and only the toilet and kitchen is covered. But here each and every room is has a different element. Even in the facade there are different elements are there. So he says the architects can no longer afford to be intimidated by the purely technical moral language of orthodox modern architecture. So he says the modern architecture is orthodox, which talks about the less is more concept. So he says, I like elements which are hybrid rather than pure, and compromising rather than the clear, and distorted rather than straightforward. So I am for messy vitality over obvious unity. I include the non sequential and this proclaim duality of the design. So he says that the more complex the form is, more more complex the design elements are. That has a better design and aesthetic value. So complexity in form, which we have seen, and then there's a pitched roof is there, which is again the pitched roof create more dynamic approach. So we have seen in the less is more concept in internationalist context. This is flat roof which has more stability in design. Then historic depiction is there, axial balance is added, which is classic, has a classical proportion in his design, and volume is added, and then in elevation the axial balance is there. In the plan also there is axial balance is there. The change of scale and proportion is there. That is also mimicry of classical architecture, because classical architecture's proportion and scale is very different, and it has to be of a monumental scale. It's not, should not be any human scale, but this is a one-story building, and within a one-story building he is achieving this historic depiction. That's how he's translating what is there in the history into the contemporary approach, which is, and transforming the scale and proportion. The ground floor is set firmly on the land, no elevated on the pilotis, which is, pilotis was again the style of internationalist movement. But also this is, if you look at, so there is no elevated platform, which was there in the classical architecture also. So there's a pediment, and then from there it starts, but he changed the way classical architecture is there, and shifted the paradigm and relooked the visual principle of classical architecture, and change the visual language. And solidity is there. Definitely it looks very solid and robust, which is not like the fragile lightweight style of internationalism. So this looks volumetrically heavy, though it is just a one-story building. Now there's another example, Piazza d'Italia by Charles William Moore, which we were discussing during the class of this modern and postmoderns difference. So if you look at the plan, so this is a Google Earth image. If you look from top, so you see a lot of eclectic depiction of Italy's Italian element. So this is designed in USA, but in 1978, which is in the beginning of this postmodern era, and lot of elements which is there in the Italy is translated into the architecture of this place. Now if we look at this concept, so this is definitely eclectic, because a lot of elements are combined together and making a collage. So how this is happening? So from the plan, if you can identify this is like an Italian peninsula, and this is Mediterranean Sea. So you can see, so this is a Italian peninsula is coming, which is like Italy's map, and this water body is acting like a Mediterranean. And so he's depicting the Italy's geography in the plan. Now also there's a distortion in the, because this is truncated, and many other elements which you see from top are quite modern and geometric, and the plaza is designed in a semicircular way. So this is again he is depicting Italian geography with the elements which is modern and contemporary. And if you look at the building, so there's a lot of different colors, and we will see how this different elements are also eclectic. And if you look at the illumination of the building, is also takes a lot of different color into the building, and different neon light, which is also this style of lighting is with the neon light is very pop, and you can see this kind of lighting in the advertisement and the hoarding, which has a pop design style. So, and this is definitely not talking about one particular color or pure color. Now this is Arch of Septimus Severus, which he is using here and here which Septimus Severus of Italy. And if you look at the way he is changing the arch, so this has the ionic fluid, but the color is different, and he used a different Italian color. So these kind of color palette, if you look at, so these color palettes are taken from the Roman cityscapes color palette. So if you look at the Roman buildings color, so these kind of shades of skin colors are there, the off-white and to orange and yellow. This kind of color palette is there in the Rome. So he is using this kind of color palette and the darker variation of that. But you can also you should look at the change of the material, and these ionic columns are translated into a different material, which is metal, which is contemporary, and this is also an abstract form of creating ionic columns. So this is just a folded plate. If you look carefully, this is just a folded plate which is creating the ionic columns curl, and then there's a geometric abstraction of the ionic column, which is designed in a different material, which is not stone, which is metal. Now another thing is this flying buttresses of this Gothic pinnacle and flying buttresses, which is also there in the Roman style, is there and changed into the into the contemporary style, is also added in the plaza. Now also another thing is this gargoyles faces. From this face the water spout comes out in different traditional architecture style, but he have taken this same concept, and the water spout is coming from his own mouth. So this is the face of Charles Moore's own face. So it's designed like his face's style, and this is the water is coming out from his own face. And there's another, you can look at another type of depiction of a column, and which is again designed in a different material. So another example of this historicism will be Stuttgart Museum by James Starling, which is in Stuttgart, Germany, and designed in 1984. Here also, if you look at, so there's the series of arches are there, and this has a depiction of history. And the series of arches has a European, or especially a depiction of Italian semicircular arches. But here it looks like Egyptian columns, and here there is also, this is blended with the contemporary facades, which is turned and twisted and blended with the rectilinearity and curvilinearity. And from top, if you look at the plan, so this plan looks like a something like this plazas and this theaters like Colosseum and Parthenon. This circularity is added, and on top this is some other different materials are added, which is totally contemporary, and this glass and steels are also visible with the stone. So there is different mixture of color, mixture of textures, which creates this building as a mixture of the fusion of history and the contemporary, and that is the way of historicism. So historicism is a fusion, but classicism is more like replicating the history. So in the furniture design, also in the interior designs, these are few examples of furniture and interior design. So this is postmodern definitely, and following the concept of historicism. So here you can see the way classical chairs are changed into a contemporary modern element. So here the chandeliers are blended with the very modern chairs, but with the colors and the borders and the mirrors are the depiction of a history. And here you can see there's a old classical cabinets are turned and twisted and changed into a contemporary postmodern style. So this is also historicism. The similar concept of historicism can be said a similar concept of historicism in the furniture design. So if you look at this example, the chandeliers and this candle stand and many of these furnitures are taking inspiration from history, even the false ceiling work, but the color choice is very pop and the postmodern, and this kind of flooring pattern is taking inspiration from history, but very contemporary in nature. Many of the furnitures are also very contemporary, with the examples of something similar to Andy Warhol's expression of pop movement, which is this kind of cushions are blended with the furnitures, which is taking inspiration from history, which is going along the thought process of historicism. We have also seen examples in the previous class. The Memphis Milano's styles architect Alessandro Mendini's chairs, which is also taking inspiration, has a similarity with the historicism, and Philip Stark's chair also is quite similar to historicism's thought process. Thank you.